Features 2024 gold medalist Kaylee Copper, Chelsea Gray, Kelsey Plum, Jackie Young, Derricka Hamby, and Rain Howard. They won the 3x3 bronze medal at the 2024 Paris Games. Leah Boston, who represented the USA in many junior and senior competitions.
The United States women's basketball program has entered one of its most scrutinized roster selections in recent memory. USA Basketball has officially unveiled its 12-player roster for the 2026 FIBA Women's World Cup qualifying tournament scheduled to take place in San Juan, Puerto Rico. This announcement has sparked immediate and intense debate across the basketball community, centered primarily on a single fundamental question: who will control the offense? The roster itself represents a carefully constructed balance of proven international excellence and fresh talent ready for their senior national team debuts. The selection includes Olympic and World Cup veterans alongside first-time senior team members, creating a dynamic that promises both stability and uncertainty. The qualifying tournament is set to run from March 11th through March 17th, presenting Team USA with a 5-game sprint format against a competitive field that includes Senegal, Puerto Rico, Italy, New Zealand, and Spain. What makes this particular roster construction so fascinating and controversial is the sheer concentration of elite playmaking talent assembled on one roster sheet. Chelsea Gray, Kelsey Plum, Caitlin Clark, and Paige Bueckers each possess the capability to initiate offense, create scoring opportunities for themselves and others, and fundamentally change the tempo of a basketball game. These are not role players or complementary guards. These are franchise-level talents, each accustomed to being the primary decision-maker for their respective teams. Yet, despite this abundance of organizational skill,
USA Basketball Women's National Team Managing Director Sue Bird selected the roster and will continue to evaluate players prior to selecting a team for the 2026 Women's World Cup, which takes place September 4th through the 13th. The USA will be...
There remains only one opening tip-off, one primary voice directing traffic, and one tone setter who will establish the identity for this squad. Historically, Team USA has leaned heavily toward international continuity when making roster decisions. There is substantial value in familiarity with FIBA rules, which differ in meaningful ways from WNBA and NCAA regulations. Chelsea Gray and Kelsey Plum have already navigated the Olympic cycle, experiencing firsthand how the floor dimensions feel different, how the physicality is officiated with a different standard, and how international teams defend with structured discipline that differs from American basketball culture. This institutional knowledge carries genuine weight when competing on the international stage, particularly when games are decided by possession execution rather than pure athletic superiority. However, the calculus becomes significantly more complicated when we introduce Caitlin Clark into the equation. Clark is not simply another talented young guard awaiting her turn in the national team pipeline. She has emerged as the gravitational center of the most substantial audience growth women's basketball has experienced in decades. The numbers tell a story that transcends traditional basketball evaluation metrics. Clark's debut on ESPN platforms drew 2.1 million viewers. A Fever vs. Sky matchup in 2024 attracted 2.25 million viewers. Another Fever Sky game broadcast on ABC in 2025 commanded 2.7 million viewers. These figures represent not incremental growth, but transformational expansion of the sport's reach.
Derricka Hamby, Rain Howard, Kiki Arifin, Kelsey Plum, Angel Reese, Jackie Young. I guess Breanna Stewart is not going to play in the qualifying round. So, yeah, people are pointing out no Asia, no Fee, no Stewie, no Alyssa Thomas. Well, let's just keep it real.
Into mainstream American sports consumption. The individual tasked with navigating these competing considerations is Sue Bird, who serves as the managing director for USA Basketball Women's National Team Operations. Bird's basketball credentials are beyond reproach. 5 Olympic gold medals, 4 WNBA championships, and a Hall of Fame career built on elite court vision and championship leadership. Her appointment to this role represents the continuation of a trend in which legendary players transition into front office positions, where their knowledge and institutional understanding can shape the next generation of American basketball excellence. Yet Bird's selection as the primary decision-maker introduces an additional layer of complexity that cannot be ignored, particularly given the composition of the current roster. Bird's deep ties to the University of Connecticut are not speculative, they are historical fact, forged through years under legendary coach Gino Auriemma and maintained throughout her professional career. These connections become relevant because one of the headline roster selections is Paige Bueckers, who herself emerged as a star at UConn and represents the latest in a long lineage of elite guards developed within that program. This creates an unavoidable optics challenge. Any rotation decision, any allocation of minutes, any determination regarding who starts versus who comes off the bench will be interpreted not solely as basketball judgment but potentially as institutional favoritism. This concern is not rooted in conspiracy theory, but rather in the basic human reality that long-standing relationships and shared institutional history can subtly influence evaluation processes, particularly when the candidates being compared possess relatively comparable skill levels. The alternative to Bueckers in this particular moment is Caitlin Clark, who represents perhaps the single most impactful force women's basketball.
Angel Reese, Caitlin Clark dynamic on the court at the same time. That's always interesting. That's always going to be an interesting dynamic. Everything was fine there. They had a, if I remember right, Caitlin Clark had a pretty sick pass to Angel Reese during the that All-Star game, and it kind of went viral, to be honest. So, very interesting.
Basketball has produced in terms of audience attraction and mainstream cultural penetration. Clark's influence extends beyond traditional basketball metrics. She has changed casual viewers into invested fans. She has transformed regular season games into appointment television. She has provided women's basketball with empirical proof that transcendent individual stars can fundamentally alter audience behavior and media economics. Therefore, any decision regarding rotation hierarchy, starting positions, or closing lineup responsibilities will inevitably be read as a statement about which direction the national team program intends to move. Will USA Basketball embrace the disruptive future that Clark represents? Or will it attempt to manage that disruption within the comfortable frameworks of tradition and established hierarchies? The calendar itself provides perfect dramatic staging for this evaluation process. The tournament runs March 11th through 17th in San Juan, Puerto Rico, providing a compressed timeline that will force quick decisions and immediate clarity regarding personnel preferences. Importantly, the United States has already secured qualification for the 2026 FIBA Women's Basketball World Cup through its status as a continental champion, which provides automatic entry under FIBA's qualifying format. This pre-secured qualification fundamentally changes the stakes of the San Juan tournament. Without must-win pressure, these qualifying games transform from high-stakes competition into a laboratory environment. The games become a public audition for future roles, rather than desperate battles for tournament survival. This shift in pressure dynamics raises the political temperature rather than lowering it, because each game becomes a visible showcase for who the program trusts, who receives responsibility in meaningful moments, and who is being groomed for larger roles when the World Cup itself arrives in September 2026. ESPN has reported that Sue Bird will continue evaluating players throughout this process before making final determinations for the World Cup roster. This ongoing evaluation framework means that the San Juan tournament represents the first draft of a hierarchy that could very well solidify into permanent roles. Once that initial draft becomes public, once fans and media begin constructing narratives around who started and who closed games, those narratives develop considerable momentum that becomes difficult to reverse. The coaching staff assembled for this tournament also reveals the program's priorities and the various perspectives that will inform decision-making. Kara Lawson leads the group as head coach, supported by assistant coaches Nate Tibbetts, Natalie Nikazi, and Stephanie White. This is not a randomly assembled staff, but rather a carefully selected group that brings diverse experiences and coaching philosophies to the evaluation process. Stephanie White's inclusion carries particular significance.
Go back. We've got Well, we got Paige Bueckers. Breanna Stewart's not actually playing. We always talk about you got to be worried about the Connecticut bias because of the managing director, Sue Bird. And I think there was some feelings that Gino Auriemma made some comments that would lead you to believe that Paige,
given her direct familiarity with Caitlin Clark's game. As a WNBA head coach, White has prepared defensive game plans specifically designed to neutralize Clark's impact. She has witnessed firsthand what happens when you allow Clark to play with tempo and freedom. She understands that Clark's greatest value often materializes upstream of traditional box score statistics in the way she warps defensive coverages, creates advantages before the offense even formally begins, and forces opponents into uncomfortable compromises. However, while coaching staffs can recommend and advocate for particular approaches, Sue Bird's role sits structurally above the bench-level decision-making. Reuters has described Bird's position as managing director with authority over both roster composition and staff selection for this entire Olympic cycle. This means the final direction will not emerge solely from tactical coaching preferences, but from a broader programmatic vision that Bird herself will ultimately determine. One of the most telling aspects of this roster is what it reveals through absence. A'ja Wilson, Breanna Stewart, Sabrina Ionescu, and Alyssa Thomas, names that typically define Team USA's baseline talent level and competitive ceiling, are not included on this qualifying tournament roster. This is not scandalous or surprising given the context. These are qualifying games for a tournament the United States has already qualified for through other means. The program is using this opportunity as a developmental laboratory, rather than deploying its absolute maximum firepower for games that do not carry elimination stakes. With the usual gravitational stars removed from the equation, the minutes and responsibilities become genuine tryouts for organizational capability. Who can structure an offense without the insulation that superstar talent provides? Who can handle FIBA officiating standards, manage tighter spacing, absorb greater physicality, and still maintain offensive coherence? These are the questions that San Juan will begin to answer. This is precisely why the dynamic between Caitlin Clark and Angel Reese matters more.
No, you guys know I'm just not going to say that. So we'll have to find out how this happens, how this ends up looking, because I don't know about you. Sixth person of the year, sixth person off the bench, Caitlin Clark does not have a ring to it for me. It does.
Than some observers want to acknowledge. Seeing Clark and Reese together in USA basketball uniforms is less about recycling old college rivalry narratives and more about basketball fit and complementary skill sets. Clark thrives when paired with bigs who can run the floor in transition, punish defensive switches with size mismatches, and finish plays in traffic through contact. Reese thrives in systems that create tempo, generate extra possessions through offensive rebounding, and feature guards willing to feed the post and deliver passes that create finishing opportunities. If the coaching staff leans into this pairing and gives it substantial minutes to develop chemistry, it signals an embrace of modern basketball identity that prioritizes versatility and pace. If the staff avoids or minimizes this combination, it signals a preference for more traditional hierarchical basketball, where established pecking orders dictate opportunity distribution. Already, we can detect the soft launch of explanatory narratives being constructed to justify potential decisions. One emerging storyline suggests a gradual handoff approach. Start with Caitlin Clark now, during the qualifying tournament, then transition primary responsibilities to Paige Bueckers later, once she has fully settled into the international environment. On the surface, this sounds like thoughtful developmental patience rather than preference-driven favoritism. However, this logic becomes shakier when examined against recent performance reality. Caitlin Clark has just completed a full WNBA season, bearing the heaviest defensive attention the league could manufacture. She was the most hunted perimeter player in professional women's basketball, facing constant physical pressure, elaborate defensive schemes designed specifically to neutralize her impact, and the mental grind of being the primary focus of opponent game planning night after night. Despite all of this, she continued showing up and producing at an elite level. Meanwhile, Paige Bueckers' recent competitive history includes an extensive ACL recovery process. Regardless of how brilliantly talented Bueckers is, and she is undeniably brilliant, that injury context does
for this team. I mean, come on. Let's not try to get cute here. And I could see them trying to get cute by doing the whole, well, she's returning from injury and yada, yada, yada. No, Caitlin Clark, I did a video, I don't know how long ago. It's been a while since she come out and said, I'm 100% ready to go.
Not simply evaporate because the calendar has moved forward. Major knee injuries require not just physical healing, but the restoration of confidence in movements, burst, landing mechanics, and finishing through contact. These elements typically return gradually, rather than all at once. Therefore, if the program chooses to prioritize a gradual handoff framework, it will inevitably land as politics and relationship management rather than performance-based evaluation. In the current media ecosystem, where every decision is scrutinized and debated across multiple platforms, perception does not wait politely for complete sample sizes to develop. The first rotation becomes the story. The first closing lineup becomes the headline. And the explanations offered afterward often sound like damage control rather than transparent clarity. This week in San Juan matters beyond its immediate competitive context because it functions as an on-court audition for Berlin. The 2026 FIBA Women's World Cup is scheduled for September 4th through 13th in Berlin, Germany, where the United States will pursue its 5th consecutive World Championship title, which would also represent the program's 12th overall World Championship. These are the stakes that elevate the San Juan qualifiers beyond mere preparatory scrimmages. Even with qualification already secured, these games represent the first public examination of role distribution, player pairings, and competitive hierarchy that will likely carry forward into the World Cup itself. In national team politics, first impressions carry enormous weight and create momentum that becomes increasingly difficult to alter. If Caitlin Clark controls games effectively in March, it becomes exponentially harder to justify shrinking her workload or reducing her responsibilities when September arrives. If Paige Bueckers receives the first opportunity and appears uneven or tentative, the conversation instantly transforms into optics and favoritism debates. And if the coaching staff attempts to split everything precisely down the middle in an effort to dodge controversy, they risk exiting Puerto Rico without a coherent team identity or a dependable closing unit. The international game also asks fundamentally different questions than WNBA basketball. The three-point line geometry is not identical, particularly in the corners, which alters help defense angles and changes what constitutes a truly open shot. The rules governing goaltending and basket interference are written differently, and these technical distinctions can swing possessions in tight games where margins are measured in single possessions. The physical standard often feels heavier because FIBA officiating philosophy is built to keep the game flowing, which rewards guards who create advantages early in possessions and punish defenders before contact fully materializes. These differences strengthen the argument for Caitlin Clark's international translation. Her shooting range is not tied to any particular line, marking it extends well beyond the arc, regardless of which rulebook governs the game. Her passing reads are built on anticipation and pattern recognition, rather than perfect spacing or predictable offensive structure. She creates offense through individual brilliance that transcends system dependencies. Paige Bueckers' game can absolutely thrive in international competition as well. Her skill level, basketball IQ, and competitive mentality are all genuine. However, any player returning from major knee reconstruction typically experiences a lag in feeling completely confident with burst movements, landing mechanics, and finishing through contact in traffic. This is not a criticism, but simply the reality of injury recovery timelines. Given this context, the player who should receive the first opportunity and primary responsibilities is the one demonstrating current readiness, rather than projected future potential. When we zoom out from the individual player comparisons, the fundamental debate is not about who deserves opportunity based on talent or potential. The question is whether basketball decisions are being made strictly on current performance readiness, or whether reputation, institutional relationships, and long-term program planning are shaping present-day choices more than anyone wants to publicly admit. Stephanie White understands the dimension of Clark's game that does not fit neatly into traditional statistical categories. It is the way one guard can tilt an entire defensive scheme before the ball even crosses half-court. Clark forces early defensive pickups beyond the three-point line. She drags help defenders a step too far from their assignments. She transforms safe defensive coverages into uncomfortable compromises because going under a ball screen becomes an open three-pointer. Switching becomes a mismatch, and sending a double team becomes an open look for a teammate. This kind of gravitational impact functions as an offensive system by itself, independent of play calls or structured sets. It is the kind of value that coaches advocate for in private meeting rooms when rotation minutes are being debated. However, the organizational structure matters significantly in this context. Assistant coaches can make compelling arguments for particular players. A head coach can express strong preferences, but this cycle features a clear decision-making authority positioned above the bench level. Sue Bird's basketball resume is unimpeachable. 5 Olympic gold medals, 4 WNBA championships, a Hall of Fame career constructed on controlling pace and delivering in crucial moments. Her knowledge of the game is not the source of concern. The concern centers on something far more human and considerably harder to measure objectively, whether long-standing relationships and institutional familiarity subtly shape evaluation processes when two candidates are close enough in ability that questions of fit become inherently subjective. This is why the San Juan tournament is being monitored as a proxy battle about far more than a starting lineup. Caitlin Clark represents disruption, not merely because she is popular or generates headlines, but because she has fundamentally changed the scale of attention and audience engagement with women's basketball. She brought casual sports fans into sustained engagement with the sport. She helped transform regular season games into mainstream sports events covered by general interest media rather than niche basketball outlets. She provided women's basketball with empirical proof of concept that transcendent individual stars can alter audience behavior and economic models. In this context, the operative question is not whether the program respects Clark's talent. Of course they do. The question is whether the institutional system embraces this disruptive future on its own terms, or whether it attempts to fold that disruption back into the comfortable patterns of traditional hierarchies and establish succession plans. Angel Reese adds a second layer to this experiment, and it is fundamentally a basketball layer rather than a narrative or personality storyline. Reese changes possessions through her rebounding activity and interior presence. She creates extra shot opportunities, draws extra fouls, and generates the kind of chaos that produces additional possessions. Clark changes offensive geometry through her shooting range and passing vision, stretching defenders into compromised angles and accelerating decision-making timelines. When you pair these two skill sets together, you create a combination that can accomplish two things. International teams particularly struggle to defend against, punishing zone defenses with quick ball movement and precision passing, and punishing physical defensive approaches with second-chance opportunities and offensive rebounding. If the coaching staff treats Puerto Rico as a genuine laboratory environment, this combination should receive substantial minutes together, not brief cameo appearances. If the staff becomes overly cautious about narrative management, they risk wasting the one thing qualifying tournaments can provide that the WNBA season never does: a protected competitive environment to test chemistry without fear of catastrophic failure. International opponents will not approach these games as preseason scrimmages or light preparation. These are national teams representing their countries with pride and competitive intensity. They bring continuity from playing together in various competitions, familiarity with FIBA rules and officiating tendencies, and defensive discipline built through structured international basketball culture. They pack the paint with defensive bodies, rotate on a string with precision, and dare opponents to defeat them through execution rather than pure athleticism. When athletic advantages are neutralized by structural defensive discipline, the most valuable player becomes the one who can solve problems, quickly shoot over zone defenses, deliver passes into tight windows, manipulate help, defense positioning, and maintain composure when contact is heavy and spacing becomes compressed. That description essentially functions as a scouting report for Caitlin Clark's game. None of this analysis means that veteran players are optional or that their contributions lack value. Kelsey Plum and Chelsea Gray bring forms of experience that cannot be simulated or fast-tracked. Plum has already navigated international competition successfully, including earning a 3x3 bronze medal at the 2024 Paris Olympics. Gray has been inside the Olympic 5x5 environment and understands how FIBA possessions swing on single decisions, how late-game execution differs from WNBA contexts, and how to manage the unique pressures of international competition. This knowledge carries genuine weight, particularly when games compress in final minutes. What makes this particular roster construction interesting is that it includes sufficient safety net talent. That experimentation does not carry the same risk it would in a true must-win elimination context. There is enough proven ability on the roster that if one starting combination appears clunky, adjustments can be made. If one pairing fails to generate chemistry, recalibration is possible. This is precisely why a rigid commitment to hierarchy would represent a missed opportunity. This is the ideal moment to test modern lineup constructions rather than defaulting to safe, traditional approaches. The spotlight will follow Caitlin Clark regardless of official broadcast details or marketing emphasis because her presence fundamentally changes the audience ceiling. The WNBA television ratings have already demonstrated this pattern clearly. When she plays, viewership increases substantially. This visibility benefits every player wearing the jersey, every sponsor associated with the program, and the overall growth trajectory of women's basketball. This makes the handling of her role even more consequential from a programmatic perspective. The team is scheduled to report to Miami for training camp on March 7th and 8th, before traveling to competition in San Juan from March 11th through 17th. Those practice sessions represent where the real depth chart begins to take shape because that is where combinations receive extended testing, responsibilities become assigned, and coaching preferences start becoming visible. Kara Lawson will establish the overall tone and approach. The assistant coaches will debate specific details and advocate for particular rotations. Sue Bird will weigh all of this input and ultimately make the determining calls. And those calls will signal a programmatic philosophy that extends beyond this single tournament. If Caitlin Clark is treated as a secondary option by default, despite her demonstrated impact, it communicates that transformational influence can still be managed downward in favor of institutional comfort and traditional hierarchies. If she is empowered early with significant responsibilities, it communicates that the program is genuinely willing to evolve alongside the sport it represents. Perhaps Clark starts, and this becomes a non-story. Perhaps rotations settle naturally, and the best fit wins out cleanly based on performance. But the mere fact that fans, media, and analysts are bracing for a politics conversation reveals something meaningful about the moment women's basketball currently inhabits. The sport has entered an era where audience gravity represents a genuine form of power, and power always tests institutions, forcing them to decide whether they will adapt to new realities or attempt to preserve existing structures. Puerto Rico will not resolve these tensions through press releases or carefully worded statements. It will settle them through actual possessions because once the ball goes up, there is nowhere to hide from reality. The rotations will reveal who the program trusts. The closing lineups will demonstrate who they believe in when games tighten. And the point guard choices will indicate whether this program is chasing the next evolution of women's basketball or attempting to keep the new era contained within manageable boundaries. If Caitlin Clark enters the tournament and immediately tilts the competitive floor, if the pace accelerates, if the offense begins producing easy scoring opportunities out of seeming chaos, it becomes very difficult to justify constraining that impact in future competitions. Stars of that magnitude do not simply fit into systems, they become the system. And when international defenses load up with their game plans, when the paint becomes crowded with defenders, when scouting becomes sophisticated and detailed, the guard who can shoot over zone defenses, deliver precision passes into tight windows, and accelerate decision-making becomes the difference between comfortable victories and grinding struggles. Conversely, If Paige Bueckers is handed the keys early and the results do not match the responsibility level, the conversation will not remain confined to basketball analysis. The optics will dominate discussion, accusations of favoritism will intensify, and Team USA will spend the entire year answering questions it could have avoided by allowing performance rather than familiarity to determine the hierarchy. This is why the coaching staff cannot afford to half-step through this process. Splitting minutes precisely to keep everybody satisfied sounds reasonable in theory until you realize it can leave you without any coherent team identity. Chemistry develops through repetition. Leadership emerges through clarity of roles. And when Berlin arrives in September 2026, nobody will care how carefully the program managed headlines in March. They will care exclusively about who can deliver gold medals when margins tighten and pressure intensifies. So, here is the simplest framework for evaluation. Watch who starts, but pay even closer attention to who closes games. Watch who receives the basketball when the offense stalls. Watch who they trust when opponents mount runs. That is where truth reveals itself. Because this is not only about one qualifying tournament in Puerto Rico. This is about whether the institutional gatekeepers of women's basketball are willing to allow the new power structure to exist in public view. Caitlin Clark represents the future, not because of hype or marketing, but because she has already fundamentally changed the demand curve for the product. If the program embraces that reality, it sends a message that the greatest impact wins, period. If it attempts to manage that impact into a secondary role, it sends a different message, one that a significant portion of the fan base is already exhausted with hearing. Either way, the answer is arriving quickly. And when it does, every detail will be analyzed thoroughly, rotation by rotation, lineup by lineup, decision by decision. The moment those rotations take the floor in Puerto Rico, the real story begins. Every angle will be covered, every decision scrutinized, every moment examined for what it reveals about the program's direction and priorities. This qualifying tournament represents far more than a routine international basketball competition. It is a referendum on institutional priorities, a test of whether performance or politics will drive decisions, and a preview of whether USA basketball is prepared to embrace the disruptive future or will attempt to manage it within comfortable traditional frameworks. The answers to these questions will emerge not from statements but from the possessions themselves, from who plays and who sits, from who closes and who watches. And those answers will echo far beyond San Juan, shaping the narrative and reality of American women's basketball for years to come. Stay locked in with my channel, Simply Explained, your home for the truth behind the WNBA headlines.